Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Just Another Autism Podcast. I'm Eileen Lamb, and today I am joined by Eva Erickson. You might know Eva from the show Survivor. Eva is currently a contestant on the show, so we are trying to keep it spoiler free, but we were very excited to speak with Eva about her experience in the CBS show Survivor. She shared her autism diagnosis with everyone on the show after a very challenging um, challenge, and it was so touching. If you haven't watched the episode yet, I really encourage you to watch it. I mean, I don't usually watch that type of shows, but I was so moved, and it's so great to see autism representation in such a well-liked TV show. So, thank you so much for joining me today, Eva, and for taking the time to share your story and challenging stereotypes about autism. Hi, Eva, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to talk to you guys.
So, before I start getting into the questions, you need to know that this was my first time ever watching Survivor. I had never watched it, but it's it's been great. I actually really enjoy it, but being from France, I had never seen the show, and I think you've got another fan now. Um, I'm on the spectrum myself too, so seeing the autism representation on the show was obviously really awesome. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your diagnosis journey? And obviously you're a child, so you don't remember, but whatever you know from that time.
Yeah, I actually called my mom this morning to ask her a little bit more about it because, like, obviously, I was so young. I was diagnosed very, very early, even for like autism diagnosis. I was just over like a year old, and but my parents were really, really proactive with this, and it was that's when I first started getting like tests and going to doctors and stuff. Is because when I was a baby, even I would just get so overstimulated and be screaming, and it was my parents were like, "This isn't just colic," and they were really trying to understand me and see what was going on. But they were thinking that throughout the day this would all build up because every night I would just scream and scream for hours and I'd be taking on so much air and like just having then trouble breathing because I was just so it's like so overstimulated, and it took them a long time to understand what was happening. And my mom tried taking me to doctors and they didn't really give her much advice. So my mom and my dad went to this thing called ECFE, which was early childhood family education. And it was a group where other parents brought their kids who were very young, and the kids would play together and the parents would learn. And I interacted very differently with the other kids than they did with each other. And my mom made a very close friend there who had another friend who had a kid who was on the autism spectrum and said, "Hey, I think your daughter is acting similar to my friend's son. Maybe I should put you two in contact with each other." And so my mom reached out to that woman, and it was like the first time that she was getting any clarity on my situation. And so from there, we went to a different doctor and who finally gave my mom a lot of good resources and a lot of education on autism. And that's when I started doing like some occupational therapy to help with sensory things, doing brushing when I was like 18 months old. And this all was had a large impact on me. And it took a while before I was officially diagnosed, and then I was put into a day program to get a ton of treatment there for many different things: occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy. And it really was all things that I just don't remember. I was so young, but my parents went through so much. And what was really, really important is that my mom and my dad were on the same page about autism, that they were like, we understand that putting a label on our daughter as someone who has autism was not bad. That this label is good and it helps us understand her and understand how we can help her. And so that I think was what was really, really key in helping me get all these opportunities to get the help that I needed, all the therapy, having people come to our home and show my parents how to deal with me in these situations where I was very overstimulated and what they could do to help. And so I'm so grateful to my parents for doing all those things because now it's just a part of my life that I barely remember. I remember little bits and pieces of being like, oh yeah, I remember I used to be put into like a spinny chair to help with that. Like the spinning around was really good for me, or being compressed really tight and squeezing, like that was felt so good. But I didn't understand why or what this was doing for me. And now I do because I've learned so much. And as an adult, I just look at my parents and I'm like, I hope one day I can be as good a parent to my
Oh,
kids as they were to me.
that's beautiful. And yeah, you talked about that on the show, how you need that pressure when you're feeling
Mhm.
overwhelmed. I'm wondering when you had a therapy, like you said you didn't really know what was happening, and something I've heard a lot from autistic adults now is that they always thought they were with a babysitter, like it was just fun and they never realized what was happening to them. Was that the case for you too?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was so young, I barely remember any of it. I just remember it being like, oh, things that I would do, and it'd be like, okay, like also I struggled with transitions and things. So my mom made all these cards that would show like pictures because I'm very visual of being like, okay, like we're gonna transition from breakfast into this next activity because I would often get very overwhelmed with just having to change things, and change is hard for me. And so just the pictures, the visuals, the steps, and I just thought everybody had that. And even my mom went to my like preschool and kindergarten teachers and had them implement these things to be like help transition. And I was very lucky that my teachers were all for this and wanted to do this, and it helped other students. But I just assumed everybody had that. Like everyone deals with these things. And so it was very, because it was so accepted for me, that I didn't realize that that's very different for other people. And so I do have recollection of that, and it's just interesting now looking back and being like, oh, like I didn't know that I was different because everyone around me did such a good job accepting that I had these differences.
Yeah, that's all you knew. So if you didn't know any
Yeah.
different, right?
Hmm.
Um, And from these tools that you learn in therapy, would you say that any of them have been helpful during Survivor?
Yeah, I've done so many different therapies in my life, and I think knowing the things that were good for me when I was little, for example, that compression, that was a thing that I've used many times in my adult life, is telling the people who are around me that I trust that this is something that they can use to help me if they find me in a situation where I am overstimulated. And I shared that with Joe in the first episode of the season. And he used exactly the instructions that I told him, and he implemented that in the moment when I was overstimulated. I was very overwhelmed and I was really struggling, and he did the exact things that I told him would help me get grounded. And so me advocating for myself early on to tell him like, hey, if something like this happens, here are the things that I know are helpful to the situation, and I'm trusting this with you. That's the step that I can take, is advocating for myself. And then him reflecting his compassion and love back at me in taking these steps that I instructed him on is just so huge, and really just shows how having this communication and like knowing myself can help others help me. So that was really big. And then there's just other things I've learned throughout my life that like come up often, where like things that in my adult life, like resetting. I often get really fixed and stuck in a loop. And that's absolutely what happens in this challenge in episode 5, is that I am continuing to fail over and over on this table maze. And I'm getting stuck in this loop in my brain where I'm like, I can't do it. Why can't I do this? And it's spinning and it's spinning faster. I'm getting really overwhelmed and I am getting out of control. I can't control my body. I can't control the fact that I'm screaming. I'm very overwhelmed. But in this case, I wasn't able to come down from that myself. I needed somebody else's help, which was huge. But sometimes on smaller scales in my life, I have a technique that I call resetting, which is I can take a step back and I can be like, okay, I'm going to reset before I do something else, and just try to ground myself in the moment. And that was a really, really helpful technique that I practiced before going on Survivor, because I knew that challenges often are done in stages. And so I was like, okay, like where can I create a reset to try to bring myself down and be like, okay, all that stuff is done. We've transitioned to a new thing. We're now going to focus on this. And so before every challenge, I would look at the challenge and be like, okay, these are the stations. These are each of the different steps. And I'm going to reset mentally. I don't stop. I don't do anything different than like looking like I'm continuing on in the challenge. But in my head, I'm going to be like, okay, we're done with the throwing portion. Now I must do the digging portion or whatever. Like really taking the second to reset to help myself to try to prevent this building up and rolling over into what ultimately turns into what I call an episode where I get overstimulated.
So what motivated you to join Survivor, and did you have any thought before going on the show that maybe something like that might happen? Like, did you picture it in advance?
Yeah, I got into Survivor when I was in college, watching it with my teammates at Georgia Tech. I played men's hockey there. I was the first and only girl to play on the men's hockey team. And my teammates were my best friends, and they're amazing dudes. And they got me into Survivor. And watching the challenges, I like got so excited. I was like, "Oh, I want to do that. That looks so cool." And I love the outdoors, and I was like got really into it from that. And the thought of applying and being on national television was like the weird thing that I'm like, oh, I want to do this competition, but like I don't want to be on TV. Like I don't need to be famous. Like that's a lot of people go on reality TV shows because they want to be famous. I was like, I just want to compete and try to win $1 million. But I thought like long and hard about the fact that like if I go on this show where I am starving on an island with nobody that I know and I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating, I'm in a crazy weird situation that's full of stresses that I've never had before. How will I mentally handle that? Because I know my brain works different than other people, and I know that I am prone to getting overwhelmed and overstimulated. And so I thought about it. I was I like what happens to me if I get overstimulated on TV? Like how is that going to go? Like how can I handle that? And I thought about it. I was like, I'm not going to let my fear of being vulnerable get in the way of me doing something that I think would be really amazing. Like I really wanted this opportunity and I didn't want something to hold me back from that. And I ultimately decided like, you know what? Like if people are going to see me in this way, I think they're going to learn. I had full faith in the people at CBS that they would not try to exploit me for the situations that I'm in. I felt that I was like, if something does happen, which it very well could, I need to be prepared to like have this exposure of myself in one of my hardest moments, but know that it will help other people. And my my parents were really worried. They care so much about me, but I ultimately they were like, this is your decision, and they're going to support me, and I chose to do it, and I took the steps that I could take when I was out there to be prepared in case something were to happen, which was, of course, initially telling Joe about my autism very early on, and then trying to implement this resetting technique in my head. Like I did a lot of psychological practice to go out there and hope that that would help me in the game, but obviously I did then still end up having an episode as we see in the fifth episode of Survivor. And so um, all these things kind of culminated together and it was like, okay, like I knew this could happen and now I get the opportunity to share my story. I try not to think of it as being like, oh no, now everyone sees me freaking out on TV. I'd rather think of it as being like, now I have the opportunity to share my story with people and hopefully inspire others to be more open about their autism as well.
Yeah, and it was amazing. I mean, to see you vulnerable in that way, I think it's really beneficial in some ways for others who are going through the same thing. It makes people feel less alone. What what does it mean for you, like to represent in some way the autism and autistic community on Survivor?
I think it's a really amazing opportunity that I have because oftentimes the mainstream media will show autism in a very specific way, in one little box. But as we know, as people who have autism, autism is not one box. Like if you meet someone with autism, you've met one person with autism, and they are very different from any other person with autism. Like it comes in so many different shapes and sizes. And so my representation of autism is very different than what you see on, say, Love on the Spectrum, which is a very popular show that it shows the autism community in a different way. So I'm someone who has been very mainstream and has been very, very successful in my life. I've had very high academic achievements, athletic achievements, and I'm well on my way to having a great engineering career. And all these things by themselves are great things for me, but then people knowing that I've done all this stuff while having autism is something that people aren't used to seeing. They're not used to recognizing that you can have autism and still be extremely successful and extremely social and want to have these conversations about autism in general. So I think that it's a really great way for people to learn more about autism in ways that they didn't expect that they would. So I'm really glad to get to represent the autism community on Survivor.
And do you think your autism helped you in any way in the show?
I definitely think that my autism helps me a lot in my life, and those things definitely come up in the show where I've learned to channel my fixations on things that I get where I get really focused in on a task. I've learned to channel that into productive tasks. Like for example, in the first episode, I got
Bamboo.
very fixated on bamboo, and so I was picking up a ton of bamboo and gathered so much that way more than we would ever need on the island. But it was really helpful to the camp, and it gave me a way to be of use. And in other things like just getting really focused athletically, I'm a very competitive athlete, and so I really like hardwire focus in on stuff, which in a challenge you get very concentrated and focused on your goal. So I think that those are great things there. And on the flip side, the fact that I know that I'm not as good at reading social cues was actually a instrumental thing for my game, because then I know that going in that I'm not going to rely on trying to detect when someone's lying to me. And so being aware of that and knowing that I can go in and try to make strong alliances instead, and instead of trying to like weed out like, oh, like, do I think this person is backstabbing me today? I'd rather just know I can step into the game and try to make a really tight alliance that I know won't backstab me. So it is kind of weird to say that something that is hard with my autism is something that actually helped me in the game, because I was able to create a strategy that worked around it.
On that note, was there anything that made you trust Joe? I mean, like from the start, and I know we don't see everything, but in
Mhm.
the episode, it felt pretty instant in the first episode. What made you trust him like right away?
So Joe is just an amazing man overall. And when we all jump off the boats and we're first introducing ourselves and saying like where we're from, what we do for work, how old we are, like what our family situation is like, just the kind of getting to know each other as we're washing off all the mud in the water. Um, Joe, when it comes to him, the first thing that he says is not that he's a fire captain, not that he's on this national search and rescue unit and goes saves people all across the country. It's not about his football career at UCLA, which he's done so many great things in his life. But the first thing he tells us, the thing he is most proud of, is that he is a father. And he
Oh,
tells us about his two amazing kids and his lovely wife, Katie, and him just being first and foremost so proud of his family just made me instantly be like, this is someone who will show compassion to me and I feel that can understand me.
I love that so much. What was your proudest moment on the show?
I can't say that because it's yet to
Not
come.
yet.
So you'll have to keep watching to find out. But I am certainly very proud of how I handled myself in episode 5 and having the ability to finish the challenge despite being extremely overwhelmed, and then being able to speak so eloquently about my situation in the aftermath. I'm very proud of that whole situation.
That was very impressive. I was getting worried for you there. It's like I could feel it through
Yeah.
the screen, but
They
you
do
did amazing.
CBS did a phenomenal job editing that to really encompass exactly the things that I was going through, and the stress and the pressure and how overwhelming the moments immediately after were for me. So I felt that that was very very hard for me to watch, my first time ever seeing myself in a situation like that, but I think that it was done very nicely.
And that's amazing that you could trust CBS to edit that in a way that was still like true to your experience, but also respectful to, so kudos to them for that.
Yep. Yeah. That was one of the things my parents were really worried about with me going onto a reality TV show, is that they're like, oh, you have no idea how they're going to edit you. Like they're going to exploit
Right.
you. But I had my mom listen to Jeff Probst's On Fire podcast, which goes into the behind the scenes of um, like making the show Survivor. And in that, he discusses so much into the casting process, the care that they take into selecting their candidates, the way that they structure all the challenges, how they go about everything they do. And it just shows how much they care, and they care about the contestants. And so hearing that, then my parents were like, okay, we feel that we can trust them to tell your story. And I felt the same way. So I do believe that CBS like really does care about the contestants on Survivor.
And you could tell Jeff's reaction was also very human and genuine when you told everyone about your diagnosis. I mean, that was very, very sweet to see him vulnerable like that.
Yeah, and something I'd never seen in all the seasons I'd watched of Survivor. So maybe that's my proudest moment is that I made Jeff cry, but
We'll
it
write it down at the
definitely
proudest moment.
yeah, made a lot of people cry. So I too have cried every time I've watched it. So
Is there anything from the first few episodes that you would change if you could go back?
I think one thing that kind of sticks out to me is in the second episode, when we're discussing who should sit out for the next challenge, I say like very directly that maybe Star should sit out, and I had then gone on to say stuff but like very direct about how Star can't swim, so she should sit out of the challenge. We're gonna be swimming, this and that, and it was like very straightforward and direct and logical in my head, but I didn't realize that I was hurting Star's feelings. And I didn't understand then when Star started to have this animosity towards me and was kind of building relationships with everyone else except me. And so I was just like, I don't get it. Like she doesn't like me, whatever. I guess I don't like her. And I think that was kind of me not recognizing the delicacy of her social cues that she was showing, and everyone else recognized that Star was hurt by the things I was saying and I did not. And I actually was later told by another member of the tribe, by Shaheen, that he was like, "Hey, like maybe don't say those kinds of things to Star." And I had no idea what he was talking about. I fully was just so like, "What?" Like, and so I think that something I would have changed was be a bit more careful with the way that I was addressing these things, because yeah, it's hard when you're telling someone to be like, oh, I don't think you should compete in a challenge. And so I think that that was something that I wish I could change and take back, is I felt very bad when I found out that I had hurt her feelings in that way.
You think after she learned about your diagnosis, like she understood better where you were coming from with the blunt comment?
Absolutely, absolutely. That was one of the most memorable conversations for me, coming out of having told everyone that I had autism, them learning this. I talked to many different people about their response to this, and Star's response was the one that stuck out to me because she came to me, this woman who had for days been plotting on my demise, been trying to get everyone to work against me. She did not want me on the island, and I then in retort did not want her out there either. So we'd been at totally opposite ends of our tribes this entire time. And then when she found out that I had autism, she it finally like it clicked in her head and she understood me. And she then had the openness and willingness to communicate with me on this and be like, "Hey, like I didn't understand before. I didn't know that you had autism and I thought you were just being rude." Like was very clear about these things, that she's like, "I understand you now and I'm so grateful to know this." And it really opened up a communication line between us. And so then I felt like more like, oh, okay, like she doesn't actually hate me for no reason. Like I had been like on like not nice to her. And that's hard for me to hear because I never meant to be disrespectful to her. And I think that that's one really powerful thing that you can see right there in that conversation, is that being telling someone that you have autism can help them understand you better, because a lot of times people don't want to share that they have autism. They want to keep that hidden because they think there's something wrong with that. But really, I think that it can open up for people to understand you better and have a better like recollection of the way that you're going to act, because they might know, oh, like Eva has autism, so she's probably going to say some things that are a bit more direct and a bit more like sound a little rude. And because I know that this is just something that she deals with, that she has autism, I can understand that she doesn't mean these things in malice. And I think that was a really important connection that Star and I made after she found out that I had autism.
Well, and I'm glad she was receptive because, as you were talking about earlier, like some people have misconceptions about autism, and, often people will think about Rain Man, for instance, and, a very stereotype um, ideas of autism. So seeing someone like you is on TV is very, very useful. And I feel like the fact that you're showing your autism in a show where there are so many challenges and where it can come out in, in ways that are challenging, but also in good ways is like so perfect because it shows a big picture of it.
Hmm.
Um, I meant to ask you, thank you for coming on the podcast, our podcast, Autism Speaks. Do you know if your parents ever benefited from any of the resources Autism Speaks offers on the website, or when did you first learn about Autism Speaks?
Yeah, my parents definitely they had been looking for so many resources and they definitely did come across a lot of the stuff with Autism Speaks way back in the day and they continue to think that the work Autism Speaks does is so great and they had actually recommended that I reach out to you guys when they knew I was going to be sharing my autism story on Survivor. And so it's really great to like be able to have this connection here because I know that you provide so many resources to people like my parents who knew nothing about autism coming in and then are thrust into this situation where they have a daughter who has so many needs that they don't know how to fill. And so it is so great to be able to have such a great place to get a lot of help from that.
Yeah, well, thank you for reaching out to us. I mean, I'm so happy we connected. Are there any ways down the road that you're hoping to continue connecting with the Autism Speaks community?
Yeah, I had heard about you guys doing some stuff for the 20th anniversary, and I'm excited to take part in some of that. So I'm looking forward to that.
Awesome. Well, Eva, I know you can't say what happens next, but we'll be following along and I hope you win. And thank you again for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.